Hello to everyone and welcome to our 115 panel discussion on AI and automation, how to prepare your workforce. My name is Jerome Ricard. I'm the VP of Research and Insight at Southern New Hampshire University. And if we can go on to the next slide, I'll ask each of our panelists. We've got this great panel and I'm looking forward to having a discussion, and I'll ask them each to introduce themselves.
Great. Thanks so much, Jerry. Hi, I'm Lisa Schumacher. I'm the Director of Education Strategies at McDonald's Corporation. I am responsible for overseeing our Archways to Opportunity program, which gives people in our 14,000 restaurants across the United States an opportunity to learn English language skills, potentially get a high school diploma if they previously dropped out, and then potentially move on to getting a 2 or 4 year college degree.
Hello, my name is Deborah Rowe. I'm the Vice President at Genesis Nursing Workforce Development. Genesis is a long-term care. We are actually operating in 27 states, and we have over 55,000 employees. I oversee Genesis in facility nurse aid training. So we do that in over 20 states, and we have about, in the past 12 months, 2,000 nurse aid training students, as well as external nurse aid training programs, and Genesis and also our university partners. Thank you.
Great.
Hi, I'm Beth Camp. I work for BJC Healthcare in St. Louis, Missouri, and manage BJC's academic partnerships and workforce development. So I spend a lot of time focusing on helping our employees complete degrees, if that is what they're offering, but then spending a lot of time now looking into opportunities where we can connect more people to careers in healthcare at the entry level, which sometimes doesn't mean formal education, but more training, like in the PCT and medical assistant space.
Great, thank you. So before we really dive in, I wanna thank each of the panelists for being here, and certainly everyone out there. I know these are incredibly unusual times, and there's the first obvious statement of the afternoon. And I find it very easy to say I'd much rather be with all of you in Florida than in sunny 42-degree New Hampshire right now. But I do think that a lot of what we're going to be talking about here today is still really incredibly germane to what we're all interested in terms of thinking about the learning that takes place in organizations and how best to utilize the human capital and resources that we have. So before diving in with some questions, I think it's important to contextualize a little bit some of the research that my team has done recently at Southern New Hampshire, and that really, in a way, spurred on the conversation we're going to have here today. And so what we were interested in really was two pieces of seemingly contradictory information that came out of some recent surveys. So the first was done at Northeastern in a partnership they had with Gallup. And what was really interesting is that through that survey, what they found was that 70% of workers, and this is, I believe, through the United States and Canada, indicated that they thought that AI and automation would actually destroy more jobs than it would create. And what was so interesting is that that survey, which came out in 2019, if you juxtapose it with one that Kinsey did just a year earlier, what they found when they asked organizations what would be the net impact of AI and automation, only 6% of organizations felt that it would have any sort of a negative impact on employees. So you have this really real disparity between what workforce was believing would take place and what the actual organizations did. And so that launched us in Southern New Hampshire to examine really what is going on in the HR and talent development space in terms of thinking about AI and automation, particularly around the impact on the workforce. So we conducted a study of over 500 L&D and HR leaders from across the United States. And what we found, not surprisingly, is about 2/3 felt that AI and automation would actually have a net positive impact on the world, and in particular on their bottom lines. And just to sort of make sure we're all on the same page here, when I say AI, what I'm really talking about is, or what we'll be talking about is AI is the use of a machine, be it a computer or something else, to actually help with a cognitive task of some sort, or to replace it entirely in terms of something that a person does. And automation is thinking, instead of in the cognitive realm or thinking, it's more about the physical. So getting back again to this sort of brief overview of our survey results, what we ended up finding was that, so you've got about 2/3 of respondents, again, HR and L&D leaders, who indicate that this will have a positive impact overall on their bottom line. And interestingly, over half said that it would have a net positive impact for their workforce. However, in a different part of the survey, we asked what percentage of their workforce they felt would be displaced by AI or automation. And what we found is that across all industries, roughly, our respondents felt that up to about 1/3 of their, that was the average actually, was about 31% of their workforce would be displaced. Yet, and that ranged all the way up from well over half for folks in the tech space, down to the lowest would have been with the construction building trades. But so we saw this real sort of industry specific really distribution of answers based upon whether or not these leaders felt in the next 5 years there'd be a displacement. So then as a learning organization, what we really tried to dig into was what percentage of HR leaders, given the fact that so many felt their workforce would be impacted, so what percentage of those leaders are preparing or were preparing at the time of this survey, which took place in December, were actively preparing? And what we were surprised to find is that well over half, actually 58%, when asked, are you preparing? They said no. And it didn't matter if they were actually, if they anticipated large displacement or not. For the most part, many organizations just indicated that it wasn't on their radar. Strategically, the march of the machines, if you will, was not something that they were planning for. So of those that did, the number one response as to how are you planning for this, and it brings us right into our discussion, was around skills and training and how they were going to incorporate that with their workforce. We had some really great questions that we asked around, you know, what advice would you give someone whose job is likely to be displaced? And there was a really interesting array of answers. So what I'd love to do now is throw out some questions to our great panel here and see what their perspectives are. And since we're going to be talking about training, we're really thinking about skills. I'd love to start off by asking if some of our panelists can talk about the goals of your own training, right? Let's get that context. And how does that prepare your employees or the employees in your organization to thrive in a more technology-driven place of work, whether it be a restaurant or a hospital, care facility? So I'd love to, wondering, Lisa, if you could start us off here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jerry. And good afternoon again from sunny. And I think we're at about 55 degrees Chicago. So I got you beat in the Midwest. So before I jump into the automation specific, AI specific question, I just want to sort of ground everybody in the context of the importance of a first job. And I think sometimes in this country, we've lost sight of that a little bit, and what you learn in that first job. So if everybody could just take a second to think about your first job and the things that you learned in that first job. And, you know, as we put together our education program, our Archways to Opportunity program, that's really the context that we were thinking about this in, is what are the skills that people learn by virtue of having that first job in a McDonald's restaurant, and how can we build on those first skills by also giving people access to formal education. And so when you think about things like teamwork and communication skills, adaptability, being resourceful, right? All of those things lend themselves to this conversation of the impact that automation and AI have on the workforce. So, really specifically talking about McDonald's restaurants is, and I'm not sure how many of you have been in a restaurant. Well, certainly no one's been in a restaurant in the last 4 weeks or so, but we moved to most of our restaurants having kiosks, and certainly that changes the way that our customers interact in the restaurant. But importantly, it also changes the way that the restaurant employees at that front counter interact with their customers. And so what we've learned is that what AI has done in our restaurants, and it's not just the kiosks, it's mobile order and pay, it's delivery, is it changes how our restaurant employees interact with our customers, and we're requiring that people have many more hospitality skills. So what happens now in a McDonald's restaurant is when you order via a kiosk, you take a table number, you go sit down at the table, and a restaurant employee comes and serves you that tray, brings you that tray to your table. And so there's much more interaction. We've gone from sort of just taking an order to somebody bringing a tray over, asking if there's anything else anybody needs, going around doing coffee refills. So again, it's that increase in hospitality and less in the transactional skill set. So it's really about sort of freeing up humans, right, to do more hospitality type jobs than transactional jobs.
That's great. Thank you, Lisa. And I love the callback to our own first jobs. I think that's such a great reminder and really sort of a place setting for all of us. So thank you. So Beth, I wonder if you can talk a little bit around the healthcare space.
Sure. As we all know, healthcare is an extremely hands-on type of business, but there's definitely incorporation of technology all over the place. A great example that I can think of is, for example, making sure that PCTs understand how to use the technology to record information that's going to go into that medical healthcare record for employees. So I've seen that incorporated, no matter what system an organization might be using, but incorporating that into initial training is really important. And going back to that first job, that is a place where we see a lot of people enter the healthcare workforce, is in that PCT, patient care tech role. So they come from all types of, educational backgrounds. Sometimes people are 18. Sometimes they might move into that position after working in areas like hospitality and in restaurants, wanting to do something that is healthcare related. So they come with those skills that they get, for example, at a place like McDonald's, but they need a little bit of more exposure to taking care of people. How do you safely take care of people? And so all of that has to be done hands-on, but a lot of it can be reinforced through the use of technology in our training. And in the last few weeks, we've seen ourselves needing to rely on that technology ability of training much more strongly, and then move our new hires in these places into opportunities where we can confirm their hands-on skills and then get them out there taking care of patients. So lots of opportunities in the healthcare space, just like in the restaurant space, alongside those interpersonal interactive skills.
Great. No, thank you. And then Debbie, I don't know if you want to make sure you get a chance as well here.
Right, and I just wanted to echo what each of the other panelists had said. At Genesis and our long-term care, a really big core of our base of our workforce is the nursing assistant, and that is what we're primarily focusing in our training. And I know I mentioned 2,000 grads in the past 12 months, and that's just a very conservative number, but we are leveraging that with them with career pathways and utilizing different mechanisms with that automation. For a sample, a CNA advancement program that just started, where people can go from care specialist 1 and 2, and there is a platform for online. The other part too is that we went from traditional classrooms to also utilizing a blended learning where the classroom perspective is online and then it's supplemented by in-person lab as well as clinical hours. So, and then the other part, as we continue to leverage those career pathways, we are doing apprenticeships with CNAs, and that's not only the CNA part from a pipeline, but also from CNA to LPN, we're also working with the automation and the advancement of the classroom component to be online, which is complemented by the clinical in the centers or in the actual schools.
That's great, thank you. So, you know, it's interesting as I sort of hear, you know, all three of you with the different organizations, but yet what seems to always, the common element or thread really seems to center a great deal, if we zoom out, on those human skills, on, right, whether it's hospitality or thinking about interacting with patients and clients, it's still around that human element, right, that the machines haven't quite got down yet, which is why Siri never quite understands that I'm really quite upset that she doesn't understand me. But so I wonder if we can move that then into the next question and thinking about, you know, so I'm hearing you're talking about these sort of human, or we all hate the term soft skills, yet we keep using it. But what are the skills you're most concerned with developing, and how did those fit within the future of work within your organization?
Yeah, Lisa, I'm happy to take that first. So, you know, just to reiterate, it really for us is, you know, those work readiness skills, right? Showing up on time is really important in a McDonald's restaurant, and I'm guessing Beth and Debbie would agree. Being able to communicate effectively with your coworkers and with McDonald's restaurant customers is a really important skill set. And again, our focus is a job in a McDonald's restaurant is really a first-time job, a springboard job. How do we make sure that we're giving them those job readiness skills and access to education so that they can think about what's next for them? For some of them, that will be continuing to work in the McDonald's system and working their way up in the McDonald's system. But for a majority of folks, it's going to be moving on to other things like healthcare. And so what we talk about is if someone is working in a McDonald's restaurant that maybe doesn't speak the language or doesn't speak the language very well, maybe dropped out of high school and does not have a high school diploma, the chances of them being able to take a next step are really very, very limited. So how can we prepare them for what's next for them? How can we help them think about what that career path for them might look like? Again, whether that's within the McDonald's system or outside of that system. But our focus absolutely is on those job readiness hospitality skills.
Right, and I just wanted to echo that at Genesis, because that is a core foundation. And I know you referenced soft skills, but they are those life and employability skills, the essential skills. And when you're asking what are they would be that customer, you know, the customer focus. It would be that, you know, client engagement. It would be, as you referenced, being on time, you know, the way to communicate, you know, from our standpoint of not only for our patients and residents, but really to each other, you know. And then the other part too is just really going through the appropriate communication line. If there is an issue or concern, we want to make sure they're versed in that reporting structure. So each of those things are built on a foundation, and we found that even as the advancement, they may stay within the nursing assistant position to lay the hand, but even in our Care Specialist 1 development of those modules and those interactive Zoom engagement, we did a lot of review on the communication to each other as peers, to colleagues, to our patients and residents and our families. So we really embedded a lot, you know, with the stress and how to do that conflict resolution. So it's still, even though you cover, we constantly are reiterating that and reinforcing with case studies, you know, in those different venues.
Yeah, and I think that that's really, you know, a key point. And then even, you know, the notion of the fact that you're using case studies, right? You're providing, again, why are case studies so effective? Because they are about stories in a way. They're fact-based stories, and that's what we are driven towards. Beth, do you have anything to add in terms of this?
I would say that our experiences are really similar. One, in addition to what these other organizations are doing, exploring careers that are available has become really important at BJC. We hire and need so many people in the entry-level positions, things like housekeeping and food and nutrition and those entry-level tech positions in the healthcare field, but there's so much that they can explore at a large organization. And so really helping those entry-level individuals get the skills that they need to be successful, like being able to communicate and showing up on time and respectful interaction with their peers, but also showing them that the success in those roles is going to lead to future success in other roles, and there's places for them to grow. So kind of planting that seed early in their career seems to get people excited about all the possibilities available, and then helping them explore that is another place I'm finding that our areas are starting to step into.
Yeah, and one thing that is I think is really interesting, and thank you all for your insights on this, is really the notion that no matter how much we start thinking about the new best set of skills, right? And I've sort of contextualized that. I saw in the chat some great information around teaching everybody Python, and that's an interesting thread and concept. But we can juxtapose that with the fact that COBOL programmers are being sought over a little bit now, right? This seemingly outdated language. However, what has not changed throughout all this is in a way, we're talking about communication, we're talking about working on a team, we're talking about these sorts of skills that in a way are really tied to what we often consider to be a liberal arts education. And the fact that really that foundation, and again, going back to the chat, how do you incorporate that into higher ed or in an undergraduate curriculum? Those skills really are core, right? They're not soft, they're core that then we build this expertise on top of. For example, the type of expertise that a healthcare provider requires or manager, right? There's this other than factors that need to go in. So I think that's really interesting. So as we think about this though, we sort of pivot because, we all know that many organizations are doing a lot in this space, but what do you see as the biggest challenge? In particular, you can sort of think about this. What is the biggest challenge as we also think about the fact that technology, regardless of what's going on, is going to continue to change? So, in terms of thinking about that, Debbie, I wonder if you could lead us off with this one.
I think our biggest challenge, and I am speaking specifically in terms of the long-term care area, is that the regulatory restrictions. And I think the COVID situation has really highlighted that, because at Genesis, as I said, our big goal is to expand our in-facility training because we want to grow our own. And what we find is the states have regulations in terms of their educational systems that they don't always recognize that blended education. So that is a really huge factor for us, because in order for us to do in-facility nurse aid training in every state, we have to get the regulatory body in each state to approve it. And they have not recognized blended education, so that's really crucial. And I think that this situation has highlighted the need significantly.
Definitely. Beth, what about your thoughts on this?
Oh my goodness, yes. I think Debbie put that very well. But even before COVID, one of the challenges that we've seen in recent years is there's not a lot of spots available in nursing school because there aren't enough instructors. And in order to get more nursing instructors, we need more spots in nursing school. And we also need a little more flexibility in how one becomes a nurse. Most programs are full-time during the day, Monday through Friday type propositions. And in our current culture and society, I talk to employees all the time who say, I want to be a nurse, but Beth, I can't quit my full-time job and lose my full-time benefits and lose my full-time tuition benefit in exchange for that. So how do we get more flexible and innovative in delivering that education in a way that meets the needs of this next generation of healthcare workers? Those are the kinds of things that keep me up. not necessarily in a bad way, but like, how could we do it? What could work? And so to echo what Debbie said, COVID has brought a lot of these needs up to the surface, which is really exciting because I've already seen things change in 4 weeks, like delivering medical assistant training virtually. So what else can we do in the next year that will change some of that and will give people more access to this flexibility in education?
No, these are great points. I think, oh, please go ahead, Debbie.
No, I just want to reiterate the states that we had said that have been some regulatory barriers with nurse aid training on blended. There's actually federally, they did a CMS waiver for temporary nurse aid, which is an 8-hour online program and supplemented with a long-term care skills and competency. And I just want to let you know there's over 15 states that approve that 8-hour online. Now, it doesn't take away the skills competency, at the nursing center. However, it's the first time I've seen such a recognition, and we continue to track the number of states that will allow that just during the pandemic.
No, that's great. And that sort of responsivity and the ability to, I think there's a lot of learning that's going to take place here in terms of some of the things that we thought we had to have in place and some that we didn't, but we need. Before we leave this, I'm wondering, Lisa, because, I think what all resonated with us is thinking about McDonald's and your first job and that springboard, but I would presume that creates a whole different set of challenges when you're thinking about training and I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yeah, so we hire probably about 1 million people a year. About 850,000 people work in the 14,000 restaurants across the country. And so we have had to sort of push out learning for obviously years and years and years. I would say probably not until fairly recently did we move from kind of a binder type learning to much more advanced shoulder to shoulder on the job training for the day-to-day tasks, right? How do you make the French fries? How do you work the cash register? All of those pieces are really done in a shoulder-to-shoulder on-the-job training fashion. What has been a benefit to us, given the current situation, is we are able now to push, because people are used to learning that way in the restaurant, we're able to push sort of new procedures out very quickly in a very agile, timely fashion.
That's great, thank you. So as I sort of watch the clock, this discussion's been so good, I'm can't believe it's already 1:43 Eastern Standard Time. And so I think, I'm going to skip one question I prepared and kind of go right to maybe tying all this together in terms of, I know right now it's very hard for many of us to predict what's going to happen, but I'm wondering if each of you could sort of weigh in on how you think or which jobs are really likely to be changed. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily replaced, but really changed by AI or automation. And, maybe we're getting a hint now at what the risk is if we don't prepare for that. So we could just we'll start with Beth and then kind of go through and hear from everyone. Because I think this is really a key to what we're talking about here.
Well, I think that just really paying attention to what's going on in the marketplace in whatever area we might be working in and staying on top of how things are changing and then making sure that that's incorporated into training, whether it's OJT or update training or training people to enter a certain area, is really going to be key. And like you mentioned earlier, we know technology changes and that it can change really quickly. So I think that can be one of the biggest challenges in the L&D space right now, is making sure that we're paying attention. We've gone through some changes recently at BJC that maybe we weren't as well prepared as we should have been, and those were kind of painful. So I would love for us to not go through anything like that in the future, because we're making sure that our academic partners are incorporating things, that we're incorporating those things, and that we're listening to what people are telling us, listening to things like, why are they leaving? Why did they go to a competitor? All of those pieces of information tell us a story. So I don't know that I can tell you like anything that I'm aware of, but more like how we plan to stay on top of it.
Yeah, Debbie, thank you, Beth.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about the automation and so forth, you know, we're still going to need the care providers, whether it's nurses, nursing assistants. So they still need the laying of the hand and that human interaction. I think the thing that's going to change is that, you know, we have found, like I mentioned, the grower owned with the nursing assistant, you know, people, we have over 200 people that got promoted and, you know, to positions of leadership, nurse practitioners, you know, directors of, you know, in terms of therapy. So I think from my standpoint, we're still going to have the positions, but I think it's going to enable people to do career advancement, you know, with these different online programs that are offered with our university partners. So it's not exactly answering what you want, but I do believe that there'll be more grower owned versus traditional routes, that people think of brick and mortar schools and that they'll use these programs online. But we're still going to need the hands-on, you know, in terms of that patients and residents.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really key point in that distinction there, that it's not an all or none necessarily. And Lisa?
Yeah, and obviously completely different industries, healthcare and hospitality, quick service restaurant, but would echo what Beth and Debbie said. There's a lot going on in the chat about coding skills, and you know, those are the things that we're paying attention to, is what does the future of work look like, and both at McDonald's and outside of McDonald's, and how do we help restaurant employees think about moving forward. You know, again, if somebody doesn't speak the language, somebody doesn't have a high school diploma, their ability to move into an IT role, for example, again, is going to be pretty limited. So we launched about 8 months ago a Women in Tech program, where we pushed out to all the restaurant employees an opportunity for females to be nominated to go through an introductory Women in Tech program. So they just got a basic understanding of what is AI, what is cybersecurity, what is coding, so that they at least got some exposure to those potential career pathways. And then it gave them an opportunity to think, well, maybe I do want to explore more in the AI field or more in the cybersecurity field. And then we give them the opportunity to do that. But for us, again, it's really about how do we expose people. And some of those people will explore technology careers and will absolutely stay within the McDonald's system and help us as we move forward. But again, many of them will move on to other places.
Oh, that's great. And it sounds like a really phenomenal initiative and really forward thinking. So thank you for sharing about that. And I think there was a question as well to find out more. So I'd like to move us now, pivot a little bit. And if the attendees have been trying to keep an eye on the chat, but there's also the Q&A function. If you've got some specific questions we put forward to our panel while we're all assembled here. The one thing I will sort of start off with, and this is for Lisa. So you mentioned English as a second language program, using the Archways to Opportunity program. Just someone in attendance is wondering if you could share a little bit more in that program.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So our English on the Arches, everything has to have Mick in it or arches in it. So it's called English Under the Arches. And it's been around for about 10 years. You know, when we started it, we thought we could, you know, push out an online delivery model and that would be successful. What we learned very quickly, which is probably intuitive to most of you, is people don't necessarily learn language via an app or via an online course all on their own. And so what we created was a program that is delivered in a hybrid model. So there's both face-to-face instruction and virtual instruction. Restaurant employees go through as a cohort, so it is location specific. We leverage community college ESL instructors to teach those classes, both the face-to-face and the virtual classes. And what we've seen is pretty significant success, both from a student perspective. Our graduation rates are in the high 80s percentile. And what we hear our graduates say is, I now feel more confident talking to my child's teacher or my child's doctor. They feel more confident in their job. But also from a business perspective, what we're seeing is the impact it has on retention. About 1 year out, our retention rate is close to 85%, and 3 years out, we're still in the high 70s, low 80s, which for any of you familiar with the QSR industry are really high numbers. So both a personal, obviously, benefit, but also an ROI for the company.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds great. And in the Q&A section, one of the attendees is thankful for sharing as well. It's great information. So wondering as sort of put this out there for everyone, and this is my interpretation, so I apologize if I'm missing it from the Q&A. When we think about getting our workforce ready for changes, right? And there are changes that we can't predict. That's the key. As we've all, right, we're all living. It's the changes you can't predict, and then how you respond. But given that maybe we're developing some muscle memory here, and we do know that technology changes and technological changes are coming, how do you see that playing out as we think about higher education, as we think about maybe professional certifications or that come through maybe not necessarily higher ed, but professional orgs? Just sort of throwing that out there to the group. Debbie, were you gonna?
Well, Debbie, sure. I can just speak from a standpoint is that we're really into like stackable skills. So as referenced previously, you know, the nurse aide position at Genesis may be that entry point, and people get that confidence. You know, they may not have had that experience in high school or secondary ed, but yet they're graduating. And it kind of enables them to say, oh my gosh, you know, I was able to successfully complete this class. You know, it had classroom, it had clinical, and it enabled them to do an assessment to say, maybe I can go on to the next level, you know, whether it's LPN or RN. And so, you know, we also have like stackable certifications like medication assistant. So I think each of those kind of build up, you know, so some people might want to do stackable certifications and others might want to go more into the advanced, you know, if they want to be an RN or if they want to go into therapy or recreation, whatever they've been exposed to, it really gave them some of that confidence to move on to the next level.
So I would just add my perspective there, and this is not necessarily on the content, but just sort of the partnerships with institutes of higher education. I think for us, the key has really been, and I mentioned this in one of our prep calls, right? We are not the experts on higher education. So we absolutely rely on our higher ed partners. But our key partners in Southern New Hampshire University is absolutely one of them, but we do have others, is understanding that adult learner, right? Understanding that working adult and the way that you have to build those programs around the barriers that many of them have to pursuing higher education. I think that is just a really critical piece for us.
No, thank you. And Beth?
I think that was very well said by the others. I don't know that I have anything else to add. I'd say we're all like having similar experiences. Yep.
Yeah. And I wonder, and there's a great conversation going on in the chat around continuous learning, right? And of course, you know, here we are, this is a panel at CLO, so it's not a surprise that would come up, but it continues to come up because it continues to prove to be true in all of our organizations, regardless if it's higher ed or healthcare or hospitality. And so I think that's really interesting. One question that was put out there, and I'm sort of taking liberties with it from the chat, but it asked about the difference in terms of thinking about, say, an entry level versus someone who's more, I think the term that this attendee wrote was more seasoned, or someone who's maybe, you know, sort of decently along in their career with the organization. So how do we reach those two groups perhaps differently or the same?
Well, I'm just going to speak for like the nursing assistant, you know, and it was really interesting, I think, when we did the CNA advancement program, because as you referenced, it could be new people. You know, we actually made the eligibility for advancement after 6 months, you know, of them working as a nursing assistant. So that's really relatively new, but we wanted to engage them because we felt there is a correlation with that level of engagement in the first year. So if we can keep them, you know, for a year, then we can keep on, you know, we hope to be more successful. We want them to keep their career with us. But in terms of the seasoned, I have to say that they still needed, you know, when we did the advancement program, they're still interested. And I think people tend to dismiss them like, oh, they've been together, you know, they've been here, they're getting their annuals. But I still think they're very thirsty for that level of knowledge. And what we found in the advancement is not only do we have the people that are literally within the first year interested, but there's a lot more seasoned employees that wanted to do. And people say, oh, well, it's the money. Well, not really, because they kind of capped at their level, but they still wanted that interaction. They wanted to take back to be a mentor. They want to have the opportunity to engage and talk about those case studies. And this is what I'm experiencing. Because one thing, no matter if you're seasoned or not, the healthcare environment is changing. You know, with that picture of a patient resident in long-term care is completely different than what it used to look like, you know, 20 years ago when over 20 years when I entered Genesis, you know. So I think, you know, we just need to be mindful that that's why it's always, you know, evolving.
No, thank you. That's a great perspective. So I want to be mindful of time. I don't know if Lisa or Beth, you want to jump in on that last question. If not, we'll sort of move to kind of the final one here. There was a great question, and we're not going to be able to use it as is, but I think is maybe an ending point for all of us. So we won't go with the top 3 barriers for better preparing the workforce and college graduates, but maybe each of you could mention what you believe is the top barrier. And so we'll come up with 3 of those. And just to make sure, again, if people have to leave, want to make sure everyone knows, thank you again for attending. Please stay safe and healthy and 6 feet apart. And I'll let everybody weigh in. And again, thanks to all of our panelists for their time here today.
Great. So I would say, and this is a little different, but I think it's access. When I think about the people that work at McDonald's restaurants, what kind of education they have access to, what they're learning in that. I mean, I live in Chicago right now. The governor just pushed out canceled school for the rest of the calendar year. Certainly there's a lot of worry about people who don't have access to technology. And obviously that's going to have a huge impact on students during the COVID-19, but it also has impact on them every day of their lives. And so I think it's access. And so when they come to us, it's really opening up that access to give them an opportunity that they may not have had before.
Great, thank you. Beth?
Yeah, I was going to say something similar to Lisa in that access and then being able to meet their needs. It is so interesting to me how I can talk to somebody who's an RN, been an RN for 2 years, and she'll call me and say, I really want a BSN program that's on the ground in the classroom because that's how I learn best. And then my next conversation will be with a 30-year nurse who says, I really want an online program because that's what's going to work for me best. So helping them know that there's lots of options available that meet their needs, not just what the organization wants to provide, but what the employees need is really one of the most rewarding things about working in this area.
Great, thank you. And Debbie, to bring us home?
Yeah, I think I kind of touched a little bit on the regulatory, because nurse aid training federally is only 75 hours with 16 hours of clinical, but every state has put their own a little touch on it. So it's gone from 75 in some states to 160 hours, and they have all their regulations on top. So I think that's a barrier, but I think that there's a lot of opportunity, so I kind of like, I think that we've opened their eyes that people can do learning 24/7, when they put their children to bed, they can get on their nurse aid, classroom, and they can listen auditory on their cell phone. and they can, you know, pace it themselves, because everybody, they might need repeat. So I think they're barriers, but I think we're turning it into opportunities, you know, so I'm going to leave it from there.
I love it. We're ending on opportunity. So thank you again to my panelists for your time, your insights, great conversation, and thank you to all out there.